All right, thank you for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here tonight, and I'm going to share with you some of our digital workflows from the Carleton Immersive Media Studio. So tonight, I'm going to take you through workflows from micro to macro scale, so going from the size of a column capital all the way up to the Quebec City Windsor corridor. I'm going to try to do that in 25 minutes. So I see a lot of familiar faces here, but for those of you who aren't familiar with CIMS's work and what we do, we're a research unit associated with the Israeli School of Architecture here at Carleton University, well, in Ottawa. Over the past decade, we've worked with public, private, and not-for-profit partners, really exploring digital technologies in architectural conservation and rehabilitation. So we were established in 2002, and we started with about 3 researchers. Now in 2018, kind of at our peak, we grew to 70 researchers, all students. So it was a really multidisciplinary team ranging from undergraduates to postdoctoral fellows, coming from disciplines of architecture, engineering, computer science, public history, and information technology. And I'd like to say that we're more than just a research studio, but I really think that we're training the next generation of AEC professionals as they move into the industry. And then you have people like me who decide to stay for forever because I love it there so much. So we have 5 streams of research. The first one is digitization. So digitally collecting the material world and transforming that into XYZ coordinates. We then take that information and develop building information models, something that everyone here is very familiar with. We also work with our colleagues in civil engineering to run simulations, so looking at lighting analysis, energy analysis, and building performance evaluations. And then we also have 2 robots, and we look at digitally assisted fabrication, so actually augmenting traditional workflows of traditional craftspeople. And then the 5th stream that we have is called digitally assisted storytelling. So taking all of the assets from the previous streams and then packaging it in an engaging way for the public. So I'm going to start with kind of the individual asset at the micro level. So in 2002, we started a research collaboration with Public Works and Procurement Canada to explore digitally assisted fabrication workflows. This was one of the first pieces that we were working on, and it's basically to digitally capture and 3D print a stone column from West Block. When we presented it to the stonecutters at West Block, they were initially, it kind of received a poor response. They were kind of cold to it, essentially because the materiality of it didn't really capture their imagination. It didn't have the same weight as stone. It didn't have the same texture as stone. And for us, it was really expensive and really time-consuming to actually just reproduce this column piece. So it took about 20 hours just to do, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, 1/4 of this column capital. In addition to the column capital, we digitized, reconstructed, and fabricated a tympanum using a CNC router. This received a much more warm response from the stonemasons. It had more materiality similar to stone, so it was a little bit heavier. But they really criticized the reconstruction. So when we reconstructed it, it didn't have at all the similarities of realistic stone carving geometry or techniques. One of the people that were present when we presented was actually Phil White. He's the Dominion sculptor, and he really saw the value in our research. So we were really lucky because he asked us to continue working with him. So following our initial explorations, we want to address those kind of criticisms about the materiality. So we looked at traditional workflows, or looked at augmenting traditional stone carving workflows. So here you can see kind of the traditional workflow for stone carving. So we looked at ways to augment this workflow using digital technology, and our goal was not to take away any work from the masons, but actually to just augment their workflows to become more efficient. So for instance, one thing that we found is in a mason's work, actually roughing out the stone, the robot can do it much, much faster, but when it comes to actually making the detail, the mason's much quicker than the robot because it takes a lot of work for the robot and the tooling path, etc. So kind of bringing those 2 worlds together makes it much more efficient. So in 2015, we purchased the KUKA KR360 and the KR6, and it's one of the only robotic systems of its kind at an academic institution in Canada.
The purpose of the project is to develop a digitally milled composition based on a unique series of hand-sculpted pieces. Each of the original sculptures are digitized using photogrammetry, arranged and digitally remodeled with some enhancements, and milled as a larger composition using the robot. Many designers have embraced the new immediacy between concept and fabrication via the computer, but it's still not commonplace to find examples of people who look to the fabrication tools as part of a larger process of discovery and invention. It can be argued that the point where a sculptor's tool meets the material is the point where the abstraction of an idea generated in the mind is made physical. And the point where the robot tooling meets the material is similarly the point where the translation from virtual model is transformed into a physical entity.
So one of our most recent projects was to develop decorative elements for the new Senate chamber. And this was in collaboration with the architects, the Dominion sculptor Phil Whites, and Heritage Conservation Services, which is a branch of PPB. So the workflow started with Phil White carving 12 species of maple leaves in high density foam, which was then digitized by HCS using photogrammetry. The point cloud data was then transformed into polygonal meshes in preparation for fabrication. And then we created a 2x2 layout with several different leaves. And then we started to mill this out using the KR6. So one of the primary goals was to retain the detail and nuance of the hand-carved leaves. So we ran a series of tests experimenting with different tools and different toolpath combinations as well as materials. So what you're seeing here is actually some of our tests in walnut and in foam. The final sample was produced using the KR6 KUKA robot that you see here. So the walnut was actually just a prototyping material. The manufacturing information, so essentially the tool paths, were passed on to the architects. They then generated the design for the leaves for a series of doors, and that was passed on to Beaubois, where they produced a mold so that they could actually cast the doors in glass. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of the finished product, but they turned out really beautifully. So we believe that the advantage of kind of testing these workflows is that the architects and clients will know exactly what they get because you're essentially handing over to them the tool path. So you kind of can guarantee what the final product will be. So now I'll move on to the Library of Parliament BIM. So our BIM workflows start with kind of the digitization of a building to generate point cloud data. So we typically use a combination of terrestrial laser scanning and photogrammetry. The data is then geo-referenced, so when we bring it into Revit, we generate several sections through the data in order to kind of recreate the geometry using the tools in Revit. It sounds simple, it's not. So one of the biggest challenges in modeling existing buildings is selecting the appropriate level of detail and level of accuracy. So what we try to do to address this is develop these parametric families that can be adjusted to the point cloud as accurately as possible, which means sometimes these window families can have up to 25 parameters. So one of the challenges with Centre Block, these Gothic windows, was kind of the pointed arch and having multiple windows and then making that parametric without having Revit kind of explode. So in the fall of 2017, we were asked by PSPC to develop BIM for one of Canada's most significant heritage assets, the Library of Parliament. At this point in time, we had already developed models for Centre Block, West Block, the exterior of East Block, and the topography. So the library became the missing piece to completing the campus BIM of Parliament Hill. Unfortunately, we were unable to digitize the whole building, so we had to rely on a mixture of data sets. So all the subterranean and all the office spaces were actually modeled from recent rehabilitation drawings. So here in this photo, wherever you see color is actually where we scanned, and when there's no color, we had to rely on secondary sources of information. So within the main reading room, it took nearly 97 highly detailed scans to actually capture the full room, and we used the Leica P40 to capture the interior space. The exterior of the library was captured by Heritage Conservation Services using photogrammetry, and we had additional documentation of the exterior that was captured during the scanning campaign for the Centre Block Rehabilitation project. So our earlier modeling research on Parliament Hill really culminated in the library and allowed us to evaluate the trade-offs between LOD and BIM performance, how to communicate data sources effectively, and how to use our protocols, which are essentially modeling workflows outlining step-by-step instructions for modeling building elements from point cloud data. But kind of despite all of our existing knowledge that we had never before encountered some of the really complex and intricate detailed geometry that's contained within the library. I'm not sure if many people have toured the library, but it's such a beautiful space. But when they asked us to model it, they gave us a tour and I looked at it and I said, oh no, how are we gonna do this? So some of the intricate details included curved windows, highly decorative railings, and flying buttresses. So modeling this complex curved geometry, intricate details, and surface deformations to a very high level of detail from point cloud required us to really augment our existing protocols, but also develop new ones. So the project was completed in less than a year with a team of 9 students working part-time. Again, fall and winter, students work part-time. During the summer, we can all kind of get together and work full-time. But it only took 5,000 hours to complete this model, which is about 3 people working full-time for a year. So the highlight of 2018 was submitting the library to the CAMBIM Awards, where it won Best in Academic and Best in Innovation. And this is the library the video that we used to submit to the awards.
The Library of Parliament Building Information Model captures one of Canada's most significant heritage monuments and is part of a larger effort to explore the application of digital technologies for architectural rehabilitation and heritage conservation at the Parliament Building's National Historic Site. In addition to 97 detailed terrestrial laser scans of the main library reading room, the model was developed using diverse sources of data, including georeferenced photogrammetry, CAD, historical photographs, and technical and research reports. One of the most significant challenges was to convey the source and validation of individual model elements to users. This resulted in the creation of a verification system that lists the source of the data within the properties of each model element and whether it is wholly, partially, or not verified to a georeferenced point cloud. This model is our most complex BIM project to date. Our objective has been to both create an accurate and detailed heritage record, as well as capture the sense of awe that this building inspires.
So for those of you that recognize Steve Vai's voice, he's the director of CIMS. You might know that he's also a musician, and he actually composed the piece of music in the back for that video as well. Just a little fun fact. So I'll move on to the Parliament Hill National Historic Site. So PSBC approached us to develop a BIM of Centre Block for the rehabilitation project. And at the same time, they asked us to develop a topography model. This was something that we had not done before at such a large scale. So our workflow started with LiDAR data from geomatics, which we tested and compared against kind of a hand-measured a CAD plan that they had. We then translated that data into a mesh, and then we tested several different workflows and software in order to kind of translate the data to a very accurate model. And so the scope also included modeling all the site features, which included the roads, sidewalks, lampposts, and fencing. And then following the creation of the topography, the next task was actually bringing together all this information. So taking all 5 models, the CAD data, the LiDAR, the point cloud data into a unified campus model, which was extremely challenging because that meant bringing together all 5 models into a single coordinate system. And that was something that was very challenging. And it was actually nice to rely on some of our industry partners that I see here tonight to help us out with that task. So it's kind of a nice relationship that we have with some of the industry members. Let's see here. Okay. So our modeling work on the Hill continues as we continue to develop the as-found model with Centris. But as you can see, our modeling we also expanded the modeling region surrounding Parliament Hill. So this brings me to our next project, which is actually the City of Ottawa model. So in 2017, we were approached by a group of stakeholders and asked us if we were interested in developing a model of the city. The goal was to create kind of one model that everyone could use, but we quickly realized that everyone had very different objectives and very different goals for what they wanted this model to be. So what CIMS needed to do was create a model that everyone could use, and it could be flexible in terms of software platforms, and it could accommodate all these different types of model uses. From the goal of CIMS, what we pushed for was to make this public. So what we wanted to do was actually host it at the library and have planners, students, anyone in Ottawa be able to access it. But also we'd have to have different read, write, and view permissions for the model. So here you can see the different layers of data that we were working with. So after we received some data, we started to develop the model in the summer of 2018. So we divide the model by city wards, and this way people could download just one ward or one section, like smaller sections of the model, or download the whole model, just to make sure we can increase performance and efficiency of the model itself. So this is the model to date. Again, one of the challenges was selecting the appropriate level of detail and ensuring consistency across the whole model. So while working with various different data sets, it's hard to find consistency, so that was one of the challenges. So here you can see that the buildings in purple are classified as we call level of detail 2. The green are level of detail 1.5, which is essentially an extrude building with a typical roof form. And the gray are level of detail 1, which is just an extrude building to the proper height, all from LiDAR data. So as new data becomes available, we're able to introduce new layers of data to the model. So it becomes this really powerful visualization tool to see this kind of city change over time. But the model goes beyond being just a visualization tool. Each building can contain metadata. So for instance, at CIMS, we often find that people come to us and say, hey, can you develop a BIM of this building, or can you scan this building? And we're like, did you know that somebody already did that? So it'd just be nice to kind of have a single repository where all this data could be stored. So here you can see all of the buildings that CIMS has either a BIM or digitized. So currently, our largest urban model covers 44,000 square kilometers. So from just outside of Toronto to Ottawa-Quebec border, from the St. Lawrence Seaway all the way up to Algonquin Park. The project was initiated in 2016 when the Ontario Economic Development Group approached us to develop an asset information model of Eastern Ontario. When they approached us, they said, have you ever done a model this scale before? And we kind of said, truthfully, no, but we'll figure out how to do it. And they were kind of aware of our previous work with Badawa and Kitigan-Zibi, but it was never to this scale. So the goal of the project is to have an interactive model that also contains metadata. So you're able to search and query at the macro urban level all the way down to the micro level, such as an asset or building. At the beginning, the exact use of the model was undefined. Essentially, they wanted it to do and be everything, but their main concern was make it look cool. So as a proof of concept, we mapped all the agri-food industry from data that we collected from 13 counties. So what began as an asset information model of the agri-food industry, perhaps in its simplest form, quickly escalated into this massive research opportunity. So after testing and analyzing the pros and cons of several different software platforms, we decided to use a 3D mapping and analysis platform called Cesium, essentially due to the restriction of readily available software. So what Cesium is, it's essentially a Google Earth, which enabled us to host and customize the entire interface and functionality through coding. The next step was to acquire additional data to fill in the gaps that weren't provided by the municipalities, and we started to generate several base maps for specific views, including infrastructure, real estate, and agriculture. So at this point, the OED expressed to us that the model would be used kind of as a promotional tool by the Ontario East Economic Development Officers, or EDOs. And essentially, the job of the EDOs is to promote business in Eastern Ontario. So they need a platform that they could access anywhere online in the world. So let's say they go to Japan, and then they can pull out their tablet and say, okay, you want to make cheese in Eastern Ontario? Here's all your dairy producers, etc. So as a promotional tool, the platform needs to be visually engaging, easy to navigate, and we'd also be able to control the read, write, and view permissions. But what this really meant for CIMS is that what started as a research lab of primarily architects and engineers meant that we had to venture into kind of coding, computer science, and programming, something that we'd never thought we'd really get into. But I think it's really enriched the research at the lab, kind of collaborating with these different disciplines. So currently the project is still ongoing, and the launch date for the first phase is expected to be within kind of the next year. And then following that launch, they're really interested in looking at phase 2, which will be mapping all of the manufacturing in Eastern Ontario. So this is just showing kind of the search functions of the model, and then being able to go back out to that urban level. So our next proposed research project is entitled Urban Futures. So Urban Futures brings together members of industry, academia, government, to essentially re-examine the smart city from a diverse and multidisciplinary perspective, which will lead to the development of richer connections and novel areas of inquiry. Our proposal is to look beyond the political boundaries of what defines a city. What is a smart city in the future? So our area of study is the Quebec City-Windsor corridor, and it's actually one of the most densely populated regions in Canada. It includes 5 of Canada's largest metropolitan areas, so Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, Toronto, Ottawa, Gatineau, Montreal, and Quebec. It's 50% of Canada's population. So while the cities that comprise this region are intimately connected to shared built infrastructure, natural ecosystems, and overlapping political jurisdictions, we rarely consider the impact that inter-urban change might have on intra-urban life. So for example, what happens when high-speed transportation comes to this corridor? What would happen to the cost and availability of housing in Ottawa? Would people choose to work in Toronto and live in Ottawa? What happens to our affordable housing market? So this research will form the basis for a major funding proposal to the New Frontiers in Research Fund. And we're really interested in connecting with anyone who wishes to participate in our kind of series of design threats that explore this topic. So thank you.